All right. So, right now, I know that we are experiencing some lag. I am actually, I'm looking at the banners right now, and I'm seeing a lot of lag on the screen. I have no idea what you guys are seeing. There have been all kinds of technical glitches because the system decided to reboot right before we were supposed to get started. So, brand new operating system, but I think that everything should be a little bit smoother already. Um, I'm adjusting one of my lamps here and gonna turn up the camera light right now, and I think we're good. I think we're good. How we doing, y'all? Let's see. I see I only have a few of you with me. I know that when it gets when I get a late start like this, I know that I run the risk of losing a lot of you, which is unfortunate, but I get it. I know how it is. And my apologies for the late start. In addition to the new operating system that's kind of running in the background, and I haven't even set up our banner yet because it's just been so much happening. But in addition, you might realize or might notice that we have some different sound. Now, maybe you don't, but I certainly do. Um, we are operating with a new professional grade microphone, which is made possible by the support of a few very specific, very special listeners and supporters of the show. And I just want to take some time out right now to offer, first of all, to all of you, for everybody that's here right now under the sound of my voice, and for those who will come later and who will catch this later, who maybe missed the live, thank you, thank you for supporting this endeavor, for supporting Storytime with Julian. And I want to give a special thanks to the people who made this possible. I want to thank my friend Les. I want to thank Melissa. I want to thank Kirk Millwood. I want to thank Nakia. I want to thank everyone who has done everything that they can to see to it that this effort, that this endeavor has everything that we need in order to put on the best show that we can. Over the weeks and over these last couple of weeks in particular, just really stepping up and stepping and showing out and being that village. I really can't thank you enough. And for everyone who has ever donated anything, $1, $2, $5, and upwards of that. And I don't want to call out people's names specifically because I don't know how people feel about having their business put out in the street, but you know who you are. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping to support this effort and for helping us to grow and to get established. Additionally, I want to give a shout out to some of our ardent supporters, to Terry Meredith, who I think is perhaps the biggest cheerleader of Storytime with Julian, to Angel, to Angel Monique, to Kamisha Umstead, to Joker, who are not only tremendous supporters, but are also a part of the staff that helps us keep going, that helps me to select stories, that helps me to find and source books. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank Gina, who, in addition to being a huge supporter, also provides me with fly wristwear so that I can be on point, so I can have my look and be sharp. I want to thank Saniqua. I want to thank Kitty Foxy. I want to thank all of you who share the post, who set up watch parties. I want to thank Erica Goodman, Erica Yolita, as we call her on the show, for all of you who set up, who do everything that you can to make sure that people find out about this thing. And your efforts, not only are they not going unnoticed by me, I certainly notice them, but they're not unnoticed out there in the world. So, for example, not too long ago, there was a little campaign, Get Julian on Audible. I think Erica Goodman, Erica Yolita, and Terry Meredith were two of the key champions for that. Some of you have heard I have since had conversations with Audible. This new microphone is a part of that endeavor to make sure that now actually there are two new mics because this one is really for story time. Audible had a mic specifically that they recommended that I was informed about that after this had already been placed, and I was able to get that microphone. So the professional narration is on its way. We're next looking to do a little bit of treatment for the space, a little treatment for the room, so that we can get the sound a little bit cleaner. But as some of you can already hear, we're already operating with some better sound. Additionally, when we were fortunate to have Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah on the show, and when we were fortunate to have Rihanna Milkar Scott on the show, so many of you kind of not so gently, not so subtly suggested that the next time Rihanna had a book to be read, they should holler at me. Without giving away too many details, I want to let you know that did not go unheard. And I was fortunate to get an email from Mr. Scott not too long ago, and there is a little something that we're going to be working on together soon that I'm really, really excited about. So everything that you do to support this effort, not only is it appreciated, but it's effective. And I really want to make sure that you know that what you're doing matters. So please, please, please continue to share, continue to big this up when I send out the promos. Like, share, subscribe, let your friends know. I can't tell you how excited I am about this and how enthusiastic I am about growing this platform. One last thing before we get into the story. And you'll have to pardon me, if we had the pre-read, I would have gotten a lot of this out already, and I was kind of ripping and rushing, and as as the ticking banner is still saying, I was running late. Let's remedy that. Oh shoot. Okay, so I made this whole change to the next banner and didn't bother to save it, because I'm very good at what I do, y'all. I'm so efficient and smooth with this, y'all don't even know. But what I wanted to shoot, I forgot what I was saying, y'all. Dag nabbit. That's the thing. After you cross that 35, your brain works different. You know what I'm talking about? Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. I need to get some of that moringa. That a friend of mine actually, oh my goodness, how am I tripping? I absolutely need to shout out Ebony Vines, a dear friend of mine from way back in my Denver days, who has stayed a constant cheerleader and supporter, and who has also helped to make some of the upgrades and updates to what we're doing here with Storytime possible. There's really so many of you that have shown your love and support in all kinds of ways, and I just want you to know, like, none of it is forgotten. All of it is appreciated. Let's put that up, because that's what we're actually going to be reading today. Tonight we're going to be reading Blood Child by Octavia E. Butler. This is the conclusion of our spooky series. We've had a lot of fun for 6 reads now. Of course, we had some things get in the way of a couple of it, because they like to schedule the collapse of our democracy on nights when we're supposed to do this. So we've missed a couple of them, and we would be going right up through Thursday, but we've started a new thing here at Storytime with Julian, where the last Thursday of every month is Storytime After Dark, where we're going to read some erotic works. So that makes tonight's work the last in the spooky series. Now, throughout this series, we've read stories that kind of deal at different levels of spookiness. And this one is not going to be particularly phantasmagorical. All right, we're not dealing with we've had stories that have dealt with demos and goblins and ghosts, and some that just dealt with sort of paranormal understandings of things that were a little twitchy, a little uncomfortable, but not necessarily spooky or scary. I will say not necessarily scary or gory. We've even had some that took paranormal twists on everyday events in sort of the Jordan Peele sense of horror. And that was in the works that we read just last week from Terry Meredith. So we've kind of run an interesting gamut here. And this next one, tonight's story, Blood Child, from the book Blood Child and Other Stories by Octavia E. Butler is one of those kind of, it's not scary, but there's some discomfort to be had. It's going to make you shift in your seat a little bit. It's going to give you pause, if you will. Before I begin, I just want to make sure everybody, first of all, how's my volume? I had the cans on earlier to check it out. I think the volume is good. I want to make sure that you guys are hearing it all right on your side. So anybody give me a little bit of a hint, a little bit of a notion. That would be so appreciated. I just want to check my time. Oh, we're well into the show time. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I'll check the scroll to see if we need to do anything later. Thank you so much, Joker. I saw that. And Angel Monique, I saw that. And we begin now with Blood Child by Octavia E. Butler. My last night of childhood began with a visit home. Tagotoy's sister, let me make sure I get that right. Tagatois is how I'm going to pronounce that. We're going to start over. My last night of childhood began at home. My last night of childhood began with a visit home. Tagatois' sister had given us 2 sterile eggs. Tagatois gave one to my mother, brother, and sisters. She insisted that I eat the other one alone. It didn't matter. There was still enough to leave everyone feeling good. Almost everyone. My mother wouldn't take any. She sat watching everyone drifting and dreaming without her. Most of the time she watched me. I lay against Tagatois' long velvet underside, sipping from my egg now and then, wondering why my mother denied herself such a harmless pleasure. Less of her hair would be gray if she indulged now and then. The eggs prolonged life, prolonged vigor. My father, who had never refused one in his life, had lived more than twice as long as he should have, and toward the end of his life, when he should have been slowing down, he had married my mother and fathered 4 children. But my mother seemed content to age before she had to. I saw her turn away as several of Tagatois' limbs secured me closer. Tagatois liked our body heat and took advantage of it whenever she could. When I was little and at home more, my mother used to try and tell me how to behave with Tagatois, how to be respectful and always obedient, because Tagatois was the Tlik government official in charge of the preserve, and thus the most important of her kind to deal directly with Terrans. It was an honor, my mother said, that such a person had chosen to come into the family. My mother was at her most formal and severe when she was lying. I had no idea why she was lying, or even what she was lying about. It was an honor to have Tagatois in the family, but it was hardly a novelty. Tagatois and my mother had been friends all my mother's life, and Tagatois was not interested in being honored in the house she considered her second home. She simply came in, climbed onto one of her special couches, and called me over to keep her warm. It was impossible to be formal with her while lying against her and hearing her complain as usual that I was too skinny. "You're better," she said this time, probing me with 6 or 7 of her limbs. "You're gaining weight finally. Thinness is dangerous." The probing changed subtly, became a series of caresses. "He's still too thin," my mother said sharply. Tagatois lifted her head and perhaps a meter of her body off the couch as though she were sitting up. She looked at my mother and my father, and my mother, her face lined and old-looking, turned away. "Lien, I would like you to have what's left of Gan's egg." "The eggs are for the children," my mother said. "They are for the family. Please take it." Unwillingly obedient, my mother took it from me and put it in her mouth. There were only a few drops left in the now shrunken elastic shell, but she squeezed them out, swallowed them, and after a few moments some of the lines of tension began to smooth from her face. "It's good," she whispered. "Sometimes I forget how good it is." "You should take more," Tagatois said. "Why are you in such a hurry to be old?" My mother said nothing. I like being able to come here, Tigatois said. This place is a refuge because of you, yet you won't take care of yourself. Tigatois was hounded on the outside. Her people wanted more of us made available. Only she and her political faction stood between us and the hordes who did not understand why there was a preserve, why any Terran could not be courted, paid, drafted in some way, made available to them. Or they did understand, but in their desperation they did not care. She parceled us out to the desperate and sold us to the rich and powerful for their political support. Thus, we were necessities, status symbols, and an independent people. She oversaw the joining of families, putting an end to the final remnants of the earlier system of breaking up Terran families to suit impatient Slick. I had lived outside with her. I had seen the desperate eagerness in the way some people looked at me. It was a little frightening to know that only she stood between us and that desperation that could so easily swallow us. My mother would look at her sometimes and say to me, "Take care of her." And I would remember that she too had been outside, had seen. Now, Tigatois used 4 of her limbs to push me away from her onto the floor. "Go on, Gan," she said. "Sit down there with your sisters and enjoy not being sober. You had most of the egg. Lien, come warm me." My mother hesitated for no reason that I could see. One of my earliest memories is of my mother stretched alongside Tigatois, talking about things I could not understand, picking me up from the floor and laughing as she sat me on one of Tigatois' segments. She ate her share of eggs then. I wondered when she stopped, and why. She lay down now against Tigatois, and the whole left row of Tigatois' limbs closed around her, holding her loosely but securely. I had always found it comfortable to lie that way, but except for my older sister, no one else in the family liked it. They said it made them feel caged. Tigatois meant to cage my mother. Once she moved her tail slightly, then spoke. "Not enough egg, Lien. You should have taken it when it was passed to you. You need it badly now." Tigatois' tail moved once more, its whip motion so swift I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't been watching for it. Her sting drew only a single drop of blood from my mother's bare leg. My mother cried out, probably in surprise. Being stung doesn't hurt. Then she sighed and I could see her body relax. She moved languidly into a more comfortable position within the cage of Tigatois' limbs. "Why did you do that?" she asked, sounding half asleep. "I could not watch you sitting and suffering any longer." My mother managed to move her shoulders in a small shrug. "Tomorrow," she said. "Yes, tomorrow you will resume your suffering, if you must. But for now, just for now, lie here and warm me, and let me ease your way a little." "He's still mine, you know," my mother said suddenly. "Nothing can buy him from me." Sober, she would not have permitted herself to refer to such things. "Nothing," Tigatois agreed, humoring her. "Did you think I would sell him for eggs for long life? My son?" "Not for anything," Tigatois said, stroking my mother's shoulders, toying with her long, graying hair. I would like to have touched my mother, shared that moment with her. She would take my hand if I touched her now. Freed by the egg and the sting, she would smile and perhaps say things long held in. But tomorrow she would remember all of this as a humiliation. I did not want to be part of her remembered humiliation, but just be still and know she loved me under all the duty and pride and pain. "Juan Hao, take off her shoes," Tigatois said. "In a little while, I'll sting her again, and she can sleep." My older sister obeyed, swaying drunkenly as she stood up. When she had finished, she sat down beside me and took my hand. We had always been a unit, she and I. My mother put back the he- My mother put the back of her head against Tigatoi's underside and tried from that impossible angle to look up into the broad, round face. You're gonna sting me again? Yes, Lian. I'll sleep until tomorrow noon. Good. You need it. When did you sleep last? My mother made a wordless sound of annoyance. "Mm, I should have stepped on you when you were small enough," she muttered. It was an old joke between them. They had grown up together, sort of. Tigatois had not, in my mother's lifetime, been small enough for any Terran to step on. She was nearly 3 times my mother's present age, yet would still be young when my mother died of age. But Tigatois and my mother had met as Tigatois was coming into a period of rapid development, a kind of Tlik adolescence. My mother was only a child, but for a while they developed at the same rate and had no better friends than each other. Tigatois had even introduced my mother to the man who became my father. My parents, pleased with each other in spite of their different ages, married as Tigatois was going into her family's business, politics. She and my mother saw each other less, but sometime before my older sister was born, my mother promised Tigatois one of her children. She would have to give us to someone, and she preferred Tigatois to some stranger. Years passed. Tigatois traveled and increased her influence. The preserve was hers by the time she came back to my mother to collect what she probably saw as her just reward for her hard work. My older sister took an instant liking to her and wanted to be chosen, but my mother was just coming to term with me, and Tigatois liked the idea of choosing an infant and watching and taking part in all the phases of development. I'm told I was first caged within Tigatois' many limbs only 3 minutes after my birth. A few days later, I was given my first taste of egg. I tell Terrans that when they ask whether I was ever afraid of her, and I tell it to Tlik when Tigatois suggests a young Terran child to them, and they, anxious and ignorant, demand an adolescent. Even my brother, who had somehow grown up to fear and distrust the Tlik, could probably have gone smoothly into one of their families if he had been adopted early enough. Sometimes, I think for his sake he should have been. I looked at him, stretched out on the floor across the room, his eyes open but glazed as he dreamed his egg dream. No matter what he felt toward the Tlik, he always demanded his share of egg. Lian, can you stand up? Tigatois asked suddenly. Stand, my mother said. I thought I was going to sleep. Later, something's wrong outside. The cage was abruptly gone. What? Up, Lian! My mother recognized her tone and got up just in time to avoid being dumped on the floor. Tigatois whipped her 3 meters of body off her couch, toward the door and out at full speed. She had bones, ribs, a long spine, a skull, 4 sets of limb bones per segment, but when she moved that way, twisting, hurling herself into controlled falls, landing, running, she seemed not only boneless, but aquatic, something swimming through the air as though it were water. I loved watching her move. I left my sisters and started to follow her out the door, though I wasn't steady on my own feet. It would have been better to sit and dream, better yet to find a girl and share a waking dream with her. Back when the Talik saw us as not much more than convenient, big, warm-blooded animals, they would pen several of us together, male and female, and feed us only eggs. That way they could be sure of getting another generation of us, no matter how we tried to hold out. We were lucky that didn't go on long. A few generations of it, and we would have been little more than convenient big animals. Hold the door open, Gan, Tigatois said, and tell the family to stay back. What is it? I asked. Tlik. I shrank back against the door. Here? Alone? He was trying to reach a call box, I suppose. She carried the man past me unconscious, folded like a coat over some of her limbs. He looked young, my brother's age perhaps, and he was thinner than he should have been, what Tugatwa would have called dangerously thin. Gan, go to the call box, she said. She put the man on the floor and began stripping off his clothing. I did not move. After a moment, she looked up at me, her sudden stillness a sign of deep impatience. Sin Kui, I told her. I'll stay here. Maybe I can help. She let her limbs begin to move again, lifting the man and pulling his shirt over his head. You don't want to see this, she said. It will be hard, but I can't help the man the way this Tlik could. I know, but Sin Kui, he won't want to be of any help here. I'm at least willing to try. She looked at my brother, older, bigger, stronger, certainly more able to help her here. He was sitting up now, braced against the wall, staring at the man on the floor with undisguised fear and revulsion. Even she could see that he would be useless. Kui, go, she said. He didn't argue. He stood up, swayed briefly, then steadied, frightened sober. This man's name is Brahm Lomas, she told him, reading from the man's armband. I fingered my own armband in sympathy. He needs Tkofte. Do you hear? Brahm Lomas, Tkofte, my brother said. I'm going. He edged around Lomas and ran out the door. Lomas began to regain consciousness. He only moaned at first and clutched spasmodically at a pair of Tugatwa's limbs. My younger sister, finally awake from her egg dream, came close to look at him until my brother pulled her back. Tugatwa removed the man's shoes, then his pants, all the while leaving him two of her limbs to grip. Except for the final few, all of her limbs were equally dexterous. I want no argument from you this time, Gan, she said. I straightened. What shall I do? Go out and slaughter an animal that is at least half your size. Slaughter? But I've never... She knocked me across the room. Her tail was an efficient weapon whether she exposed the sting or not. I got up, feeling stupid for having ignored her warning, and went into the kitchen. Maybe I could kill something with a knife or an axe. My mother raised a few Terran animals for the table and several thousand local ones for their fur. Tugatwa would probably prefer something local, an Akti perhaps. Some of those were the right size, though they had about 3 times as many teeth as I did and a real love for using them. My mother, Hoa, and Kui could kill them with knives. I had never killed one at all, had never slaughtered any animal. I had spent most of my time with Tugatwa while my brother and sisters were learning the family business. Tugatwa had been right. I should have been the one to go to the call box. At least I could do that. I went to the corner cabinet where my mother kept her large house and garden tools. At the back of the cabinet, there was a pipe that carried off wastewater from the kitchen, except that it didn't anymore. My father had rerouted the wastewater below before I was born. Now the pipe could be turned so that one half slid around the other and a rifle could be stored inside. This wasn't our only gun, but it was our most easily accessible one. I would have to use it to shoot one of the biggest of the Akti. Then Tugatwa would probably confiscate it. Firearms were legal in the preserve. There had been incidents right after the preserve was established. Terrans shooting Tlik, shooting Ntlik. This was before the joining of families began, before everyone had a personal stake in keeping the peace. No one had shot a Tlik in my lifetime or my mother's, but the law still stood. For our protection, we were told. There were stories of whole Terran families wiped out in reprisal during the assassinations. I went out to the cages and shot the biggest Akti I could find. It was a handsome breeding male, and my mother would not be pleased to see me bring it in, but it was the right size, and I was in a hurry. I put the Akti's long, warm body over my shoulder, glad that some of the weight I'd gained was muscle, and took it to the kitchen. There, I put the gun back in its hiding place. If Tugatwa noticed the Akti's wounds and demanded the gun, I would give it to her. Otherwise, let it stay where my father wanted it. I turned to take the Akhti to her, then hesitated. For several seconds, I stood in front of the closed door, wondering why I was suddenly afraid. I knew what was going to happen. I hadn't seen it done before, but Tigatois had shown me diagrams and drawings. She made sure that I knew the truth as soon as I was old enough to understand it. Yet, I did not want to go into that room. I wasted a little time choosing a knife from the carved wooden box in which my mother kept them. Tigatois might want one, I told myself, for the tough, heavily furred hide of the Akhti. Gan! Tigatois called, her voice harsh with urgency. I swallowed. I had not imagined a single moving of the feet could be so difficult. I realized I was trembling, and that shamed me. Shame impelled me through the door. I put the Akhti down near Tigatois and saw that Lomas was unconscious again. She, Lomas, and I were alone in the room. My mother and sisters probably sent out so they would not have to watch. I envied them. But my mother came back into the room as Tigatois seized the Akhti. Ignoring the knife I offered her, she extended claws from several of her limbs and slit the Akhti from throat to anus. She looked at me, her yellow eyes intent. Hold this man's shoulders, Gan. I stared at Lomas in panic, realizing that I did not want to touch him, let alone hold him. This would not be like shooting an animal, not as quick, not as merciful, and I hoped not as final. But there was nothing I wanted less than to be part of it. My mother came forward. Gan, you hold his right side, she said. I'll hold his left. And if he came to, he would throw her off without realizing he had done it. She was a tiny woman. She often wondered aloud how she had produced, as she said, such huge children. Never mind, I told her, taking the man's shoulders. I'll do it. She hovered nearby. Don't worry, I said. I won't shame you. You won't have to stay and watch. She looked at me uncertainly, then touched my face in a rare caress. Finally, she went back to her bedroom. Tigatois lowered her head in relief. Thank you, Gan, she said with more courtesy than... Thank you, Gan, she said with courtesy more Terran than Tlik. That one, she is always finding new ways for me to make her suffer. Lomas began to groan and make choked sounds. I had hoped he would stay unconscious. Tigatois put her face near his so that he focused on her. I've stung you as much as I dare for now, she told him. When this is over, I'll sting you to sleep, and you won't hurt anymore. Please, the man begged. Wait. There's no more time, Brahm. I'll sting you as soon as it's over. When Tukov arrives, she'll give you eggs to help you heal. It will be over soon. Tukov, the man shouted, straining against my hands. Soon, Brahm. Tigatois glanced at me, then placed a claw against his abdomen, slightly to the right of the middle, just below the left rib. There was movement on the right side. Tiny, seemingly random pulsations moving his brown flesh, creating a concavity there, a concavity here, a convexity there, over and over, until I could see the rhythm of it and knew where the next pulse would be. Lomas's entire body stiffened under Tigatois' claw, though she merely rested it against him, and she wound the rear section of her body around his legs. He might break my grip, but he would not break hers. He wept helplessly as she used his pants to tie his hands, then pushed his hands above his head so that I could kneel on the cloth between them and pin them in place. She rolled up his shirt and gave it to him to bite down on, and she opened him. His body convulsed with the first cut. He almost tore himself away from me. The sound he made, I had never heard such sounds coming from anything human. Tugatois seemed to pay no attention as she lengthened and deepened the cut, now and then pausing to lick away blood. His blood vessels contracted, reacting to the chemistry of her saliva, and the bleeding slowed. I felt as though I were helping her torture him, helping her consume him. I knew I would vomit soon. Didn't know why I hadn't already. I couldn't possibly last until she was finished. She found the first grub. It was fat and deep red with his blood, both inside and out. It had already eaten its own egg case, but apparently had not yet begun to eat its host. At this stage, it would eat any flesh except its mother's, let alone it would have gone on excreting the poisons that had both sickened and alerted Lomas. Eventually, it would have begun to eat. By the time it ate its way out of Lomas's flesh, Lomas would be dead or dying and unable to take revenge on the thing that was killing him. There was always a grace period between the time the host sickened and the time the grubs began to eat him. Tugatois picked up the writhing grub carefully and looked at it, somehow ignoring the terrible groans of the man. Abruptly, the man lost consciousness. Good. Tugatois looked down at him. I wish you Terrans could do that at will. She felt nothing, and the thing she held. It was limbless and boneless at this stage, perhaps 15 centimeters long and too thick, blind and slimy with blood. It was like a large worm. Tugatois put it into the belly of the Achti, and it began at once to burrow. It would stay there and eat as long as there was anything to eat. Probing through Lomas's flesh, she found 2 more, one of them smaller and more vigorous. A male, she said happily. He would be dead before I would. He would be through his metamorphosis and screwing anything that would hold still before his sisters even had limbs. He was the only one to make a serious effort to bite Tugatois as she placed him in the Achti. Paler worms oozed to visibility in Lomas's flesh. I closed my eyes. It was worse than finding something dead, rotting, and filled with tiny animal grubs, and it was far worse than any drawing or diagram. Ah, there are more, Tugatois said, plucking out 2 long, thick grubs. You may have to kill another animal, Gan. Everything lives inside you Terrans. I had been told all my life that this was good and necessary thing that Talik and Terran did together, a kind of birth. I had believed it until now. I knew birth was painful and bloody no matter what, but this was something else, something worse, and I wasn't ready to see it. Maybe I never would be, yet I couldn't not see it. Closing my eyes didn't help. Tugatois found a grub still eating its egg case. The remains of the case were still wired into a blood vessel by their own little tube or hook or whatever. That was the way the grubs were anchored and the way they fed. They took only blood until they were ready to emerge. Then they ate their stretched elastic egg cases. Then they ate their hosts. Tugatois bit away the egg case, licked away the blood. Did she like the taste? Did childhood habits die hard? Or not die at all? The whole procedure was wrong, alien. I wouldn't have thought anything about her would seem alien to me. One more, I think, she said. Perhaps 2. A good family. In a host animal these days, we would be happy to find 1 or 2 alive. She glanced at me. Go outside, Gan, and empty your stomach. Go now while the man is unconscious. I staggered out, barely made it. Beneath the tree just beyond the front door, I vomited until there was nothing left to bring up. Finally, I stood shaking, tears streaming down my face. I did not know why I was crying, but I could not stop. I went further from the house to avoid being seen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw red worms crawling over redder human flesh. There was a car coming toward the house. Since Terrans were forbidden motorized vehicles except for certain farm equipment, I knew this must be Lomas's Tlik with Ki, and perhaps a Terran doctor. I wiped my face on my shirt, struggled for control. Gan, Kui called as the car stopped. What happened? He crawled out of the low, round, slick, convenient car door. Another Terran crawled out the other side and went into the house without speaking to me. The doctor. With his help and a few eggs, Lomas might make it. Tigotifte, I said. The Talik driver surged out of her car, reared up half her length before me. She was paler and smaller than Tigatois, probably born from the body of an animal. Talik from Terran bodies were always larger, as well as more numerous. 6 young, I told her, maybe 7, all alive, at least one male. Lomas, she said harshly. I liked her for the question and the concern in her voice when she asked it. The last coherent thing he had said was her name. He's alive, I said. She surged away to the house without another word. She's been sick, my brother said, watching her go. When I called, I could hear people telling her she wasn't well enough to go out, even for this. I said nothing. I had extended courtesy to the Talik. Now I didn't want to talk to anyone. I hoped he would go in, out of curiosity if nothing else. Finally found out more than you wanted to know, eh? I looked at him. Don't give me one of her looks, he said. You're not her. You're just her property. One of her looks. Had I picked up even an ability to imitate her expressions? What'd you do, puke? He sniffed the air. So now you know what you're in for. I walked away from him. He and I had been close when we were kids. He would let me follow him around when I was home, and sometimes Tigatois would let me bring him along when she took me into the city. But something had happened when he reached adolescence. I never knew what. He began keeping out of Tigatois' way. Then he began running away, until he realized there was no away, not in the preserve, certainly not outside. After that, he concentrated on getting his share of every egg that came into the house, and on looking out for me in a way that made me all but hate him, a way that clearly said, as long as I was all right, he was safe from the Talik. How was it really? He demanded, following me. I killed an Akti. The young ate it. You didn't run out of the house and puke because they ate an Akti. I had never seen a person cut open before. That was true, and enough for him to know. I couldn't talk about the other, not with him. Oh, he said. He glanced at me as though he wanted to say more, but he kept quiet. We walked, not really headed anywhere, toward the back, toward the cages, toward the fields. Did he say anything? Kui asked. Lomas, I mean. Who else would he mean? He said, Tigotif. Kui shuddered. If she had done that to me, she'd be the last person I'd call for. You'd call for her. Her sting would ease your pain without killing the grubs in you. You think I'd care if they died? No, of course he wouldn't. Would I? Shit. He drew a deep breath. I've seen what they do. You think this thing with Lomas was bad? It was nothing. I didn't argue. He didn't know what he was talking about. I saw them eat a man, he said. I turned to face him. You're lying. I saw them eat a man. He paused. It was when I was little. I had been to the Hartman house and I was on my way home. Halfway here, I saw a man and Stalik, and the man was Ntalik. The ground was hilly. I was able to hide from them and watch. The Talik wouldn't open the man because she had nothing to feed the grubs. The man couldn't go any further, and there were no houses around. He was in so much pain. He told her to kill him. He begged her to kill him. Finally, she did. She cut his throat. One swipe with one claw. I saw the grubs eat their way out, then burrow in again, still eating. His words made me see Lomas's flesh again, parasitized, crawling. Why didn't you tell me that? I whispered. He looked startled as though he'd forgotten I was listening. I don't know. You started to run away not long after that, didn't you? Yeah, stupid. Running inside the preserve, running in a cage. I shook my head, said what I should have said to him long ago. She wouldn't take you, Kui. You don't have to worry. She would, if anything happened to you. No, she'd take Juan Hoa. Hoa wants it. She wouldn't if she had stayed to watch Lomas. They don't take women, he said with contempt. They do sometimes. I glanced at him. Actually, they prefer women. You should be around them when they talk among themselves. They say women have more body fat to protect the grubs, but they usually take men to leave the women free to bear their own young, to provide the next generation of host animals, he said, switching from contempt to bitterness. It's more than that, I countered. But was it? If it were going to happen to me, I'd want to believe it was more too. It is more. I felt like a kid. Stupid argument. Did you think so while Tugatwa was picking worms out of that guy's guts? It's not supposed to happen that way. Sure it is. You weren't supposed to see it, that's all. And his Talik was supposed to do it. She could sting him unconscious and the operation wouldn't have been as painful. But she still open him, pick out the grubs, and if she missed even one, it would poison him and eat him from the inside out. There was actually a time when my mother told me to show respect for Kui because he was my older brother. I walked away hating him. In his way, he was gloating. He was safe, and I wasn't. I could have hit him, but I didn't think I would be able to stand it when he refused to hit back, when he looked at me with contempt and piety. He wouldn't let me get away. Longer-legged, he swung ahead of me and made me feel as though I was following him. I'm sorry, he said. I strode on, sick and furious. Look, it probably won't be that bad with you. Tugatwa likes you. She'll be careful. I turned back toward the house, almost running from him. Has she done it to you yet? He asked, keeping up easily. I mean, you're about the right age for implantation. Has she? I hit him. I didn't know I was going to do it, but I think I meant to kill him. If he hadn't been bigger and stronger, I think I would have. He tried to hold me off, but in the end had to defend himself. He only hit me a couple of times. That was plenty. I don't remember going down, but when I came to, he was gone. It was worth the pain to be rid of him. I got up and walked slowly toward the house. The back was dark. No one was in the kitchen. My mother and sisters were sleeping in their bedrooms or pretending to. Once I was in the kitchen, I could hear voices, Talik and Taryn, from the next room. I couldn't make out what they were saying. Didn't want to make it out. I sat down at my mother's table waiting for quiet. The table was smooth and worn, heavy and well crafted. My father had made it just for her before he died. I remembered hanging around underfoot when he built it. He didn't mind. Now I sat leaning on it, missing him. I could have talked to him. He had done it 3 times in his long life. 3 clutches of eggs. 3 times being opened up and sewed up. How had he done it? How did anyone do it? I got up, took the rifle from its hiding place, and sat down again with it. It needed cleaning, oiling. All I did was load it. Gan. She made a lot of little clicking sounds when she walked on bare floor, with each limb clicking in succession as it touched down, waves of little clicks. She came to the table, raised the front half of her body above it, and surged onto it. Sometimes she moved so smoothly she seemed to flow like water itself. She coiled herself into a small hill in the middle of the table and looked at me. That was bad, she said softly. You should not have seen it. It need not be that way. I know. Well, Chagoftkif now. She will die of her disease. She will not live to raise her children, but her sister will provide for them and for Brahm Lomas, sterile sister, one fertile female in every lot, one to keep the family going. That sister owed Lomas more than she could ever repay. He'll live then? Yes. I wonder if he would do it again. No one would ask him to do that again. I looked into the yellow eyes, wondering how much I saw and understood there, and how much I only imagined. No one ever asks us. You never asked me. She moved her head slightly. What's the matter with your face? Nothing. Nothing important. Human eyes probably wouldn't have noticed the swelling in the darkness. The only light was from one of the moons shining through a window across the room. Did you use the rifle to shoot the Akti? Yes. And do you mean to use it to shoot me? I stared at her, outlined in the moonlight, coiled, graceful body. What does Terran blood taste like to you? She said nothing. What are you? I whispered. What are we to you? She lay still, rested her head on her topmost coil. You know me as no other does, she said softly. You must decide. That's what happened to my face, I told her. What? Kui goaded me into deciding to do something. It didn't turn out very well. I moved the gun slightly, brought the barrel up diagonally under my own chin. At least it was a decision I made. As this will be. Ask me, Gatois. For my children's lives? She would say something like that. But she knew how to manipulate people, Terran and Talik. But not this time. I don't want to be a host animal, I said. Not even yours. It took her a long time to answer. We use almost no host animals these days. You know that. You use us. We do. We wait long years for you and teach you and join our families to yours. She moved restlessly. You know you aren't animals to us. I stared at her, saying nothing. The animals we once used began killing most of our eggs after implantation long before your ancestors arrived, she said softly. You know these things, Gan. Because your people arrived, we are relearning what it means to be a healthy, thriving people. And your ancestors, fleeing from their home world, from their own kind who would have killed or enslaved them, have survived because of us. We saw them as people and gave them the preserve when they still tried to kill us as worms. At the word worms, I jumped. I couldn't help it, and she couldn't help noticing it. I see, she said quietly. Would you really rather die than bear my young Gan? I didn't answer. Shall I go to Juan Hoa? Yes. Hoa wanted it. Let her have it. She hadn't had to watch Lomas. She'd be proud, not terrified. Tugatois flowed off the table onto the floor, startling me almost too much. I'll sleep in Hua's room tonight, she said, and sometime tonight or in the morning, I'll tell her. This was going too fast. My sister Hua had almost as much to do with raising me as my mother. I was still close to her, not like Kui. She could want to Gatois and still love me. Wait, Gatois! She looked back, then raised nearly half her length off the floor and turned to face me. These are adult things, Gan. This is my life, my family. But she's my sister. I have done what you demanded. I have asked you. But it will be easier for Hua. She has always expected to carry other lives inside her. Human lives. human young who should someday drink at her breast, not at her veins. I shook my head. Don't do it to her, Gautois. I was not Qui. It seemed I could become him, though with no effort at all. I could make Juan Hua my shield. Would it be easier to know that red worms were growing in her flesh instead of mine? Don't do it to Hua, I repeated. She stared at me, utterly still. I looked away, then looked back at her. Do it to me. I lowered the gun from my throat, and she leaned forward to take it. No, I told her. It's the law, she said. Leave it for the family. One of them might use it to save my life someday. She grasped the rifle barrel, but I wouldn't let go. I was pulled into a standing position over her. Leave it here, I repeated. If we're not your animals, if these are adult things, accept the risk. There is risk, Gautois, in dealing with a partner. It was clearly hard for her to let go of the rifle. A shudder went through her, and she made a hissing sound of distress. It occurred to me that she was afraid. She was old enough to have seen what guns could do to people. Now her young and this gun would be together in the same house. She did not know about the other guns. In this dispute, they did not matter. I will implant the first egg tonight, she said as I put the gun away. Do you hear, Gan? Why else had I been given a whole egg to eat while the rest of the family was left to share one? Why else had my mother kept looking at me as though I were going away from her, going where she could not follow? Did Tigatois imagine I hadn't known? I hear. Now. I let her push me out of the kitchen, then walked ahead of her toward my bedroom. The sudden urgency in her voice sounded real. You would have done it to Hoa tonight, I accused. I must do it to someone tonight. I stopped in spite of her urgency and stood in her way. Don't you care who? She flowed around me and into my bedroom. I found her waiting on the couch we shared. There was nothing in Hua's room that she could have used. She would have done it to Hua on the floor. The thought of her doing it to Hua at all disturbed me in a different way now, and I was suddenly angry. Yet, I undressed and laid down beside her. I knew what to do, what to expect. I had been told all my life. I felt the familiar sting, narcotic, mildly pleasant. Then the blind probing of her ovipositor. The puncture was painless, easy. So easy going in. She undulated slowly against me, her muscles forcing the egg from her body into mine. I held on to a pair of her limbs until I remembered Lomas holding her that way. Then I let go, moved inadvertently and hurt her. She gave a low cry of pain, and I expected to be caged once within all of her limbs. When I wasn't, I held on to her again, feeling oddly ashamed. I'm sorry, I whispered. She rubbed my shoulders with 4 of her limbs. Do you care? I asked. Do you care that it's me? She did not answer for some time. Finally, you were the one making the choices tonight, Gan. I made mine long ago. Would you have gone to Hua? Yes. How could I put my children into the care of one who hates them? It wasn't hate. I know what it was. I was afraid. Silence. I still am. I could admit it to her here, now. But you came to me to save Hua. Yes. I leaned my forehead against her. She was cool velvet, deceptively soft. And to keep you for myself, I said. It was so. I didn't understand it, but it was so. She made a soft hum of contentment. I couldn't believe I had made such a mistake with you, she said. I chose you. I believed you had grown to choose me. I had, but Lomas. Yes. I had never known a Terran to see a birth and take it well. Qui has seen one, hasn't he? Yes. Terran should be protected from seeing. I didn't like the sound of that, and I doubted that it was possible. Not protected, I said. Shown. Shown when we're young kids, and shown more than once. Gatois, no Terran ever sees a birth that goes right. All we see is intellect, pain and terror, and maybe death. She looked down at me. It's a private thing. It has always been a private thing. Her tone kept me from insisting. That and the knowledge that if she changed her mind, I might be the first public example. But I had planted the thought in her mind. Chances were it would grow, and eventually she would experiment. You won't see it again, she said. I don't want you thinking any more about shooting me. The small amount of fluid that came into me with her egg relaxed me as completely as a sterile egg would have, so that I could remember the rifle in my hand and my feelings of fear and revulsion, anger and despair. I could remember feelings without reviving them. I could talk about them. I wouldn't have shot you, I said. Not you. She had been taken from my father's flesh when he was my age. You could have, she insisted. Not you. She stood between us and her own people, protecting, interweaving. Would you have destroyed yourself? I moved carefully, uncomfortably. I could have done that. I nearly did. That's Qui's away. I wonder if he knows. What? I did not answer. You will live now. Yes. Take care of her, my mother used to say. Yes. I'm healthy and young, she said. I won't leave you as Lomas was left, alone, intellect. I'll take care of you. And thus endeth the story. So, you have just heard Blood Child, the titular story from the collection Blood Child, which you can see here. I know that in the links you can see that we are in the comments. You can see that we've posted the link. Let me go ahead and make that visible for everyone. You can purchase Octavia Butler's Blood Child by visiting Harriet's Bookshop at the address that's posted below, if you haven't purchased it already. But that is the story. Now, as is the case with all of Ms. Butler's stories in this particular series, there is an afterword, and I'd like to read that to you. But first, let me get your comments. Let me get your feedback. I'm going to scroll back up and see if I've missed anything. But no, just a little bit of commentary about the sound and the mic and the catch up. How do you feel about the actual story? Can I get a what? Can I get a woo? I see that Latricia doesn't want pause. I'm not sure what that's about. Are you all there, or did something freeze? Did we miss because I'm actually not seeing any change here. At any rate, okay, here we are. I'm starting to see comments popping up. I think there was just a delay, but let's see. Terry says, that was one of my fave pieces from her collection. I was surprised to learn that Octavia Butler was adamant that she was not drawing any parallels to slavery. I was like, how, Sway? They can't leave. They can't escape. The male children have to bear their children. Yeah, pretty much sounds like slavery parallels to slavery. Me am talk good. Pretty much sounds like slavery parallels to me. I can't see how she would adamantly assert that she was not drawing those. Perhaps she did not intentionally, but almost certainly something in that residual DNA was communicating that idea on her behalf. While we're waiting on commentary, please don't forget to like and follow and share our pages. On Facebook, you can find us at Storytime with Julian. Our Twitter handle is Storytime Julian. Instagram is the same, Storytime Julian. And on YouTube, all you got to do is go to youtube.com/Storytime with Julian. And if you want to follow me personally on the Twitters, you can reach me at Magnet for Awesome. That's Magnet numeral 4 Awesome. Kelly James loves Butler's take on what it would be like if men could get pregnant. I mean, yeah, but it's a little bit more than just pregnancy. It's alien pregnancy, which I mean, you ain't gotta take it. You gotta take us all the way there. You ain't gotta have maggots eating our flesh, multiple maggots, but dad gum. You said something about giving us pause. Oh, haha. Okay, I get it. I get the joke now from earlier. Wow, yeah, that's really so let's talk about that. Octavia Butler says that she was not drawing parallels to slavery. Apparently, she stubbornly said so. What are some of your thoughts about that? Did you all see? I mean, me personally, how could I not see slavery parallels? I mean, even the preserve sounded very much like a plantation of sorts. It felt a little bit like a cross between a plantation and maybe like what is it? The I'm drawing a blank here. Reservations. But there was sort of this idea that, oh, we've set aside this space where you can be safe, but of course you're still beholden to all of our very specific rules. So yeah, there's a lot of that. Let's see. I see L Jack's got a comment. I am curious to hear from another male voice about this story about implantation. L Jack says maybe she was so adamant. I don't know what language he's spoken right here. Maybe she was so adamant. I'm going to say that's because she didn't want to reduce the audience for this story. That's fair. That's a fair guess. I think that's a fair possibility. I want to go ahead and read the afterwards and hear from her own words what she has to say. And then we've got a little bit of opportunity for some more thoughts before we close out for tonight. Again, thank all of you for coming in and sharing with us and spending this time. Let's see what Ms. Butler has to say, and then we'll go back to the comments. It amazes me that some people have seen Bloodchild as a story of slavery. It isn't. It's a number of other things, though. On one level, it's a love story between two very different beings. On another, it's a coming-of-age story in which a boy must absorb disturbing information and use it to make a decision that will affect the rest of his life. On a third level, Bloodchild is my pregnant man story. I've always wanted to explore what it might be like for a man to be put in that most unlikely of all positions. Could I write a story in which a man chose to become pregnant, not through some sort of misplaced competitiveness to prove that a man could do anything a woman could do, not because he was forced to? I'm not sure we passed on that one. Not because he was forced to, not even out of curiosity. I wanted to see whether I could write a dramatic story of a man becoming pregnant as an act of love, choosing pregnancy in spite of, as well as because of, surrounding difficulties. Also, Bloodchild was my effort to ease an old fear of mine. I was going to travel to the Peruvian Amazon to do research for my xenogenesis books, Dawn, Adulthood Rights, and Imago. And I worried about my possible reactions to some of the insect life of the area. In particular, I was worried about the botfly, an insect with what seemed to me then horror movie habits. There was no shortage of botflies in the part of Peru that I intended to visit. The botfly lays its eggs in the wounds left by the bites of other insects. I found the idea of a maggot living and growing under my skin, eating my flesh as it grew, to be so intolerable, so terrifying that I didn't know how I could stand it if it happened to me. To make matters worse, all that I had heard and read advised botfly victims not to try and get rid of their maggot passengers until they got back home to the United States and were able to go to a doctor, or until the fly finished the larval part of its growth cycle, crawled out of the host, and flew away. The problem was to do what would seem to be the normal thing, to squeeze the maggot out and throw it away, was to invite infection. The maggot becomes literally attached to its host and leaves parts of itself behind, broken off if it's squeezed out or cut out. Of course, the part left behind dies and rots, causing infection. Lovely. When I have to deal with something that disturbs me as much as the botfly did, I write about it. I sort my problems by writing about them. In a high school classroom on November 22nd, 1963, I remember grabbing a notebook and beginning to write my response to the news of John Kennedy's assassination. Whether I write journal pages, an essay, a short story, or weave my problems into a novel, I find the writing helps me to get through the trouble and get on with my life. Writing Bloodchild didn't make me like botflies, but for a while, it made them seem more interesting than horrifying. There's one more thing I tried to do in Bloodchild. I tried to write a story about paying the rent, a story about an isolated colony of human beings on an inhabited extrasolar world. Excuse me. Excuse me again. On an extrasolar world. At best, they would be a lifetime away from reinforcements. It wouldn't be the British Empire in space, and it wouldn't be Star Trek. Sooner or later, the humans would have to make some kind of accommodation with their hosts. Chances are this would be an unusual accommodation. Who knows what we humans have that others might be willing to take in trade for a livable space on a world not our own? Okay, so that's Ms. Butler's take on it. I don't know. I'm not really seeing uh the love story angle. I see that there is a sort of love, but looking here in the comments, yeah, I think Terry nails it here. Love story reads to me as the Stockholm syndrome born of helplessness and hopelessness. Who was going to save them? Which is exactly the point that Ms. Butler makes at the end of her essay. Also, when you grow up conditioned to a kind of behavior, I mean, think about it. Uh, Gan had no real life outside of Tukatoa. He had no knowledge of what it was like not to be in her embrace, not to be held by her, not to be quote unquote loved by her. So how much of that was he really choosing, and how much of that was just social conditioning from what was the hegemony of that particular planet? Like, that was the security he knew, that was the safety he knew, and that was the only life that he knew, was um to be held by her in every definition. So yeah, I don't really see it as him choosing. You know, she said she wanted to write a story about a pregnant man who didn't do it out of competitiveness, but out of love, and didn't do it because he was forced to. And I'm not entirely sure that I see it personally as not forced and out of any kind of a pure love. It's arguable and debatable that there were expressions of love there toward the end. Um, but what kind of love is that when that's all you've been conditioned to, when you've been told from birth that this is your purpose, that this is what you're being groomed for? How much of a choice is that? So you know I see a lot of argumentation for the hold on a second. I struggled with the love story I was hearing. I could not place the love where there seemed to be an absence of choice. That was the comment that I meant to speak to, that Jack had. And while I see a lot of comments here that are, advocating for the pregnant man angle, I mean, nobody's going to argue that the pregnant man story is not there. And I'm certainly not going to argue with any women about what the nature of a fetus inside the body is like. But I will say that I did not see a love story of any real sort there to me. And so I get it, but everybody is going to be everybody is certainly going to have their opinions. Kamisha actually offers an interesting observation. She interprets the love story as being his love for his sister. Romantic love isn't the only love. That's a good and fair point, and one that I hadn't considered. he definitely, in that moment of fear for his sister, demonstrates a sacrificial love in the choosing, in the choosing that he makes. So I can definitely see that. I think that's a really, really great point. Um, anyhow, that is our time. I think, yep, we are at 11:16, and I do like to try and keep the time, keep to the right time. We got a little bit of a late start. This is the end of our spooky series. I can say that for me, this story did read as true horror. Lots of blood, lots of gore, a lots of certainly challenging thoughts. I'm probably not going to sleep easy tonight. I am looking forward to sharing more time with you all on Thursday. On Thursday, we're going to be doing Story Time After Dark. So this is the end of our spooky series, even though we're going to be right up on All Hallows Eve. We're not going to be doing a spooky story. I mean, unless I can find a spooky erotica story, but I'm not even sure I'm ready for that kind of mashup right now. But we are going to do the Story Time After Dark, and we're going to keep that going every final Thursday of the month. And just a couple of other quick bits of housekeeping. Tuesday, November 3rd is election day. If you haven't already, I encourage you, please, please, please make your way out to vote. It's too late to mail in ballots. If you have a mail in ballot, you can still drop it off at drop boxes. You can take it directly to your county clerk and present it in person. You can, if you have previously requested a mail in ballot and have not yet received it, go to your county clerk and request it, fill it out, and drop it off in the same trip. Therefore, it's certified. But at least 30 of the states of this union are not going to count ballots that are received after the close of the polls on election day. So if you have any opportunity at all to vote, please do that. Of course, it's going to be a high anxiety day for a lot of us awaiting the results. And I think, we understand that from a timely standpoint, we're probably not going to get the results of the election on election night. But I anticipate that a lot of us are going to be watching the election coverage very closely. I am almost certainly, probably because I'm a glutton for punishment. I will try and post up a back episode, schedule one to post up for that time period for those of you who do want an escape and don't want to watch election coverage. So I'll try and have something up on Tuesday, November the 3rd. But otherwise, I'll be watching with bated breath, BATED, bated breath. Anyhow, y'all, this has been Story Time with Julian. I am the Julian in question. This is the end of our time. Thank you so much for coming out. Please continue supporting. Please continue visiting with us every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 p.m. Tell your friends, tell your family, bring your loved ones, and please stay for the closing credits. All right. I'll see you next time, Thursday. Peace.